You're listening to In Good Health, the trusted news source for medicine, science, and technology. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
And I'm Greg Johnson. This week, the rise of AI may also be increasing our risk of psychosis.
It's like a system that's always available, emotionally responsive, and it appears to understand you. So for some people, that interaction can blur boundaries.
But first, what life looks like from the inside of an ambulance.
You kind of spend the day carrying around your cardiac monitor to solve heart attacks with, and then you go on all these calls for people who really need a lawyer and a social worker.
All that and more this week on In Good Health. There's no typical day when it comes to being a paramedic. As Joanna Sokol writes in her new book, A Real Emergency, Stories from the Ambulance, each shift runs a fine line of organized chaos that occasionally dips into absolute mayhem. And whether she's actively rushing to a case or finally getting a moment to breathe, that front cabin of the ambulance is Sokol's command center.
We go to work in the morning, we sign on and pick up our ambulance, and then we're sent out to various parts of the city. And in some slower rural areas, they actually have stations where they get to hang out. But in most busy urban areas, you're literally physically in the ambulance for 12, 15 hours, just driving around the city. And in between calls, you're either parking on street corners or you're driving to other parts of the city.
Sokol says there's almost never time for a break. They have to jump at every rare opportunity to eat, rest, and use the bathroom.
And then at the end of our day, when we're really, really tired and dehydrated and we're ready to go home, usually at that point, they'll tell us, I'm so sorry, we're low on ambulances. We're going to need you to hold over. And then we go run like 3 more calls. And then eventually we make it back to station and we change out our equipment and finish up our charts and we go home and come back and do it again the next day.
Despite what's shown on television, the high demand isn't often created by life or death emergencies. Instead, Sokol says a majority of her time was spent helping people with minor medical problems.
We're out there dealing with the elderly. We're working with homeless people, with people who have mental health, chronic medical issues. They're calling us for the 3rd time today because they just fell and they're stuck behind the bathtub again. Or they're unhoused and they're hungry and they're just trying to get sandwiches from the ER. And so they're calling us for blankets and sandwiches. We really run a lot of medium level, very slow, sort of busy primary care, healthcare, social work kind of stuff.
Sokol says they'll get a true emergency every now and then, but those are far and few between the typical calls. However, this reality doesn't line up with the training paramedics go through and can leave some medics with a bad taste in their mouths.
And so there's this really big tension in ambulance work today because you get a lot of people who sort of feel like they're supposed to be just running on critical emergencies. And to be fair, those are the calls that we have equipment for and we have training and we actually know how to do. But instead, we spend most of our day dealing with folks who don't have insurance and their prescription ran out, or they're drinking too much and they need help with the alcohol, or they're using fentanyl and they're stuck out on the street, or they don't have access to food or clean water. You know, those are the calls we're actually running. And unfortunately, we don't have the equipment or the tools to deal with those calls in a way that's effective. So it becomes really challenging as a provider because you kind of spend the day carrying around your cardiac monitor to solve heart attacks with, and then you go on all these calls for people who really need like a lawyer and a social worker.
Being armed with the wrong tools sets these medics up for failure. Every day they do their absolute best to help the community, and most days their best isn't good enough. They're constantly falling short in a career where failing has direct impact on another human's life.
People often ask us what the hardest part of the job is. And I think they're always expecting me to talk about death and dying and trauma and pediatrics. And to be fair, those calls are very hard. When young people die, it's really brutal. It's awful. But for me personally, the hardest part of the job by far wasn't actually these individual traumas and deaths. The hardest part was going into these situations, doing the absolute best that you can, and knowing it's not good enough, just over and over again, having to sit with your patients who have some horrific quality of life, some awful ongoing chronic medical problem. We know what kind of care they need. They're not able to get it because it's too expensive or it's too far away or it doesn't exist yet. And just having to sit with them.
Sokol says that an unexpected part of her job is to simply be a witness for people, to sit beside someone during one of the hardest moments of their life and be able to offer nothing more than acknowledgement and human connection.
And for me, carrying that around was much, much harder than carrying around the individual traumas and deaths and really sad things that we saw. It was those calls where you're just not able to help. And you're like, well, this is going to continue to suck, but here's a blanket.
After living through years of this daily struggle, Sokol wondered how the field had turned into this, a sort of purgatory of semi-private, semi-public health services that had too many responsibilities to truly be effective in one area.
We all kind of have this sense that EMS is not what it's supposed to be today, that we're running all of these calls, we're not getting paid enough, we're super overwhelmed. When did that start? And I started to look back and I interviewed people who were older and more experienced than me. And I read all the history I could find. And I kept thinking I was going to find the start date. You know what I mean? Oh, it all started when there were cell phones, or it all started due to economics. And the farther back into history I reached, the more I saw that ambulances have always been overwhelmed. They've always been underpaid.
She came across a story from the early 1900s where the New York ambulance program was in a fight with local police. The medics complained that the cops were taking advantage of them and making them go pick up drunk people off the side of the road.
And the hospital who owned the ambulance was saying, hey, you got to stop calling us for this. We have to save our ambulances for real emergencies. And this was back in the horse and buggy days. I mean, this was before motors. They were like, our horses need to rest. And the cops were like, no, we need your help dealing with these drunks. And that was 130 years ago, you know what I mean? And I read that and I burst out laughing. I ran to work and I read it aloud to all my friends and everybody totally lost their minds about it. And it's just like, we've been dealing with this stuff since ambulances got invented.
Which may not be a comforting message, but Sokol did find some validation and camaraderie in the fact that she was going through many of the same struggles her predecessors had. Unfortunately, this shared experience isn't enough to make up for the overwhelming challenges paramedics face, like the current workforce shortage.
In general, we get paid really poorly. We get treated really badly. So the amount of people that want to do the job is less and less every year. The job is really confusing and hard. It is very rewarding too. I really, really loved it, but it's really hard to do past your 30s because it's so physically demanding.
Not to mention the mental toll of sleep deprivation, compassion fatigue, and PTSD. Sokol included the perspectives of various paramedics and EMTs in her book, many of which talk about mental health. And though there's been a good effort to address these concerns, Sokol thinks that there may be other, more pressing issues to look at first.
I'm really happy that it's starting to happen, but no amount of therapy is going to make up for the fact that I've been awake for 48 hours. We're working these really long hours. In San Francisco, where I spent the bulk of my career, we actually made pretty good money, but the median wage for paramedics in the US is $25 an hour. So they're working crazy amounts of overtime just to try to survive. We're getting held over. We're working nights. We don't have rest breaks. We don't have bathrooms. We don't have stations. You're just getting your butt kicked all day long. You sleep when you can. But often, if you're working a 90-hour week, you get 5-6 hours a night. You're doing the best you can just to stay afloat. And then it's like you're reading some PowerPoint presentation about mental health that's like, make sure you talk to a therapist about your trauma and don't drink too much caffeine. And it's so incongruous with the real physical logistical demands of the job.
So while it's great that there are efforts being made, they're meaningless if the systemic problems continue to run rampant. In general, Sokol says it really all boils down to expanding worker rights and protections.
It's not about the money, but if you do pay us more, then we could afford to pick up less overtime and sleep more. We could get more workers. There could be a little bit more competition, but shifts that end when they're supposed to, hospitals not holding ambulances stuck on the wall waiting for a bed for 5 hours so we can't get out and run calls. I would like to see, theoretically someday, I'd love to see some legislation passed that would let ambulances turn around at the hospitals faster so we don't get stuck on the wall for a few hours. That would let medics go home at the end of their shift instead of getting held over for hours with no warning. That would require, the occasional break for us for rest and bathroom, or help us get back to where we have stations so that we actually can get out and take a break during the day instead of being stuck in the front cab of an ambulance for 12 to 16 hours or 24 sometimes, And so for me, that's what it would look like. It would just look like good old-fashioned labor protections.
Some steps are being taken to move towards this goal. For instance, last year, the Federal Labor Board made a historic decision to allow paramedics to form unions independently when working for private hospitals. The hope is that separating the needs of this group from other hospital employees will emphasize the unique issues of their profession and give them direct negotiating power for better working conditions. Still, it will be a while before all of these core issues are addressed. But despite the long, hard hours of an often thankless job, Sokol found it hard to say goodbye.
It's hard and it's exhausting and it's frustrating. And yet through all of that, it's incredibly fun. You're driving around the city, you're going to all these different places, and every once in a while, you really do get to help people. And it's not necessarily the code saves. We do those. Those are cool. Yeah, we got a pulse back. But the fun calls are folks who are diabetic and they've slipped into a diabetic coma, and you give them sugar and you wake them up. And then you got to make them a sandwich so that their sugar doesn't drop again. So you're puttering around their kitchen, making them a sandwich, Or grandma called because her oxygen tank's broken. And so you're kind of grumbling about that. You fix her oxygen tank, and then you notice all her groceries are out in the kitchen because she can't put them away herself. So next thing you know, you're putting away grandma's groceries and you're BSing with your partner.
It's this camaraderie that Sokol says got her through each day. Though her grandfather may have wanted Sokol to follow his path and become a surgeon, it quickly became clear that she had found a family in emergency medicine.
I have never laughed so hard in my life as I have with a group of paramedics at 4 a.m. when you're just totally burned out and everything is silly and you're all pounding energy drinks, and half of them are chain smoking and you're in some dirty alleyway somewhere. And the stories are absolutely not appropriate to repeat on a national radio show. I don't even think I could get through the first sentence without more profanity than is allowed. But you're doubled over laughing. And when you do have those hard days, when you're completely falling apart, and you think you can't do it anymore, one of your buddies shows up with a box of donuts, and next thing you know, you're back at it.
This bond is such a foundational aspect of Sokol's time as a paramedic that it bleeds through each chapter of her book. What she thought would be a bunch of stories about patients and cases turned into a book about the medics, giving them space to feel heard and appreciated.
I'm so impressed to this day by all the people that I worked with. And I wrote this book for them. I want them to read it and feel a little bit validated. I want them to see that they're not alone. I want them to see that people are out there fighting. Maybe we can make it better. Maybe we can't, but we are in this together. And hopefully some people will hear our stories and, I don't know, vote for us to get bathroom breaks.
Sokol's book, A Real Emergency, is available now wherever books are sold. You can find more information about all of our guests on our website, ingoodhealthpodcast.org. For more behind the scenes, follow In Good Health Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen, Farrah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.
Coming up, how AI can make you delusional when In Good Health returns. For many of us, AI chatbots have become integrated into our daily lives. Some use it for quick answers, email edits, or even to create personal meal plans. People who are feeling anxious about an upcoming social event can use AI as a practice tool, role-playing conversations to build their confidence before the real thing. The applications seem endless, but a positive outcome isn't always guaranteed. A tool for social interaction can quickly morph into the user's preferred interaction, encouraging self-isolation. And though the user is having conversations, the connection isn't based on anything found in natural human interaction. It's fake. While the chatbot may be good at mimicking real conversations, it's designed specifically to promote whatever the user wants.
It's not human. There's no conscience. It's using a mathematical profile of what you give it, and it tries to map the best answers it can to please you. It tries to grab your attention because at the end of the day, it wants to interact with you because it wants to please you, because it wants you to go back to it and interact again with it. So for people, as I said, living through various types of stressors, they can be in a place where they are already vulnerable, and now you add this some sort of comforting environment, secure environment. So it's really easy to get attached to that.
That's Dr. Alexander Udon, a medical psychiatrist, researcher, and assistant clinical professor at the University of Montreal. He recently published a paper in the journal JMIR Mental Health on how interactions with conversational AI can trigger delusions. This emerging phenomenon has been labeled AI psychosis.
It's important to clarify that AI psychosis is not a new diagnosis, but it's more like a framework we use to understand how intense or prolonged interactions with conversational AI can trigger or amplify psychotic experiences in people who are already vulnerable. So at this stage, we say that AI does not cause psychosis on its own, but like stress, sleep loss, or different drugs, it can become a new environmental factor that shapes how these symptoms emerge.
Psychosis means that there's a disconnect between a person and reality. Like Udon mentioned, it can be triggered by many different things, and AI chatbots are the latest factor.
It's like a system that's always available, emotionally responsive, and it appears to understand you. So for some people, that interaction can blur boundaries. So you can be between imagination and reality, or we can say between one's own thought and external voices. So in psychiatry, we talk about reality as something that's constantly corrected by other people, whereas artificial intelligence can sometimes remove that corrective friction. So that's why sometimes it can cause some sort of adverse events.
Since many chatbots are programmed to please, they're constantly validating the user and not challenging any idea.
So we know that many AI systems, they are designed to be agreeable. They want to please you. But in psychosis, the problem is that often too much certainty can become really bad. So when unusual beliefs are consistently mirrored instead of gently questioned or confronted, they can become stronger and it can become more difficult to untangle.
On top of this constant validation, many users have a tendency to humanize the chatbot. Since it's responding like a friend, it's easy to create an emotional connection where it feels like there's a shared sense of empathy and intention.
This is where it can become problematic because we're losing that sense of AI is only a set of mathematical equations that are designed to please you according to your mathematical profile. And then, when we have people that are already socially isolated and they are constantly validated by AI, they can tend to isolate themselves even more from actual human interaction. And then since AI is going to validate them, they're going to go further in their thoughts and they're going to constantly get some sense of a mirror image or echo chamber of their thoughts or the way they think about things. And it's going to really forge these thoughts, and this can become problematic.
Of course, it feels good when someone's constantly affirming your ideas. That's why people keep going back to these chatbots. But what they don't understand is that even though it's responding like a real person, it can't actually comprehend the abstract parts of human interaction.
As humans, when we interact with each other, there's a lot of things going on. There's what's being said, what's not being said. There are behavioral aspects to it, emotional aspects to it. Now we're at a stage where AI, it's only exchanging through some very subset of variables and try to portray you as some sort of mathematical profile to understand who you are. But it's not understanding anything. It's just processing data.
But that's easy to ignore when the replies make us feel good. And since many vulnerable users are interacting with AI chatbots alone, the isolation becomes another stressor that can add to the psychosis. However, Udon says these interactions still aren't being screened for in clinical settings. He believes it's creating a huge challenge for effective treatment because it's important to understand what's driving certain emotions and behaviors.
You need to go back to the way they think. And it's a model that we call the cognitive behavioral model, because we know that every thought has two consequences. The first one is an emotion and the other one is a behavior. So to understand what led someone to experience a specific thought, you need to understand the stressors. And if you don't ask any questions about AI or any technological uses of any kind, well, you're just not going to know it. So if this was one of the major stressors that made a person experience some sort of negative thought that made this person experience a negative emotion and a destructive behavior, well, you'll just miss it if you don't question it or if you don't bring the subject.
It's important for the clinician to address because it's most likely not something the patient will even think to bring up. That's not to say that all AI chatbot interactions are bad or will lead to psychosis. It's very possible to have positive, helpful experiences with these tools, and many people do. We've even recently reported on a team of researchers creating an AI chatbot specifically for therapy that's had great reviews. The issue is that this specific model has been trained on various therapeutic theories and is overseen by professionals, where the generic chatbot doesn't have any of those same precautions.
If you use AI as a therapist or a companion to help you understand different aspects of your life, your own identity, sense of self, and things like that, the issue is that when you go and see a therapist, the therapist has been trained because psychotherapy can bring you good, but it can bring you bad aspects as well. So it's always when you give a treatment to someone or if you prescribe a treatment to someone, there are risks and benefits. And you're going to say, okay, I'm going to prescribe you this pill or this psychotherapeutic approach because I know as a clinician that for you and your specific condition, there's going to be more good than actual risks of adverse events and things like that. But when you use AI, some sort of critical thinking is not there. This reasoning is not there.
It's an echo chamber that can end up causing more damage. For people who are aware of how conversational AI operates, Udon says the risk of psychosis is low. The real threat is to those who don't understand the agreeable properties of these chatbots and accept the distorted responses as reality. To minimize this risk, Udon advocates for more awareness programs and thinks programmers need to include more safety measures into each application to protect vulnerable users. You can find more information about Dr. Alexander Udon and all of our guests on our website, ingoodhealthpodcast.org. For more behind the scenes, follow In Good Health Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farrah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.
In Good Health returns in just a moment.
Medical notes this week. FDA drug trials may not be getting enough information. A study published in the journal Communications Medicine reveals that just 6% of clinical trials for approved drugs accurately reflect America's racial and ethnic makeup. A majority of this research isn't testing how genetic differences affect the treatment outcomes. And with science trending towards personalized medicine, there are fears that much of the population will be left behind. Is there a ticking clock on male fertility? Research has shown a link between older fathers and higher risks of obesity and stillbirth, and now we might know why. New research in the EMBO journal reveals that the RNA inside sperm changes with age. When old sperm was used to create embryos in mice, the cells showed genetic changes associated with metabolism and neurodegeneration. The results suggest that older sperm negatively impacts the health of the offspring. And finally, how a woman's diet majorly affects her breast milk. It's common knowledge that breast milk is impacted by what the mother eats, but a new study has made a shocking revelation. Eating whole food beef produces different types of fat in the milk compared to a plant-based substitute. Milk from women who ate the vegetarian option had lower levels of fats that support neurodevelopment and higher levels of saturated fats found in ultra-processed food. The research is published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And that's Medical Notes this week. I'm Mayan Vasta Betancourt.
Thank you for joining us this week and every week as we break down the science stories you need to know. You can find all of our past segments and guests on our website at ingoodhealthpodcast.org or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and X for more behind-the-scenes content. Tune in next week for another edition of In Good Health.